This is the Literary License Podcast with your hosts, Vickie Ray, Jon Wilson, and Keith Chawgo. Discussing book to screen and everything in between. Coming at you from the UK and USA.
They keep it real.
Welcome back. Our next section will be an interview with V Brockmeyer, who's done a fantastic book called Let's start over.
I'm sorry. He's really trying here, okay?
Ni pense, kind of pense.
100 purple lotus in the lake, in the middle where it's still. 100 purple lotus on a mirror where it's dark and deep, accessible only to bees and hummingbirds. They don't see their beauty, they only see the food. I can smell the nectar from here. I wish I was a leaf that could float over the surface, instead of a person who would sink down among the roots and snakes and sea monsters and bump against my legs.
What is that?
International indeed.
Hang on.
Down to
I have no idea what that came on.
We should all, before we start, we should just all go la 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 la.
Suitcase full of candles, hat stuffed with prayers. The candles drop out one by one. They fall and roll across the floor. White and perfect, unlit souls. And the prayers escape into the air, rising high and losing form. Dark vapors in the night. Am I asleep or am I awake? Do I like high or do I like cake?
Welcome back.
Am I here or am I there? Am I dead or am I chill? Standing in a sandbox, kicking over castles. Didn't anyone ever tell you? If you stand deep in a hole during the day, you can see the stars. You can see the stars.
Hello, welcome to Listen.
I knew he could do it. Let me hear it.
No, he got little.
Their small light hearts. Pulling together our positives and negatives. In the thunder and the storms, we'll feel together and alone. Our tiny feelings spreading beside us, encircling us, illuminating the flashes of the sky. They grow a little each time we can see them. Small buds and tender shoots in a garden fed by lightning. We'll sit together, breathing in the earth and sky, where trees tower over our heads, growing madly north to south. We'll be together and alone. You can see the stars. We'll be together and alone. You can see the stars. High, dear, real, all, mine, yes, seven, ripe, smile, sleep, deep, clear, any, more, floating, warm, soft, home, new, yummy, free, live, silent, holy, simply, sweet, lucky, this, happy, wide, endless, are, be, fine, light, white, bright, praise, tender, still, one, heaven forever, heaven, how, heaven now, heaven is now, heaven on earth.
Here we go. Let's see how I can fuck this one up.
Do it.
There we go.
Hello, listeners. Welcome to the Literary License Podcast. I am your co-host, Wilson, along with my fellow co-host,
Hi, guys.
Vickie Ray, and Keith Chawgo.
Hello.
Today's episode is a very special episode. It marks our 1-year anniversary. Yay!
Yay, for us.
We will not only be discussing some of our past episodes, but we'll be also talking about what's coming up for season 2. Keith, can you believe it has been a year since the inception of this podcast that you came up with that pulled us all together.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's been worthwhile. I mean, to be honest, I thought it was going to be a lot of work, but it hasn't actually been work that I've actually quite enjoyed. So, in the beginning days, we were a bit rough around the edges, but I think we found our beating and our call after, some trials and tribulations, and we figured out a format that worked for us. So, and I think it's been worth it. I've enjoyed the past year.
Yeah, and for our fans, this all new to all of us. So Keith actually had come up with this idea of doing a podcast that was books to film and exploring sort of the differences between the two. And I thought it was a brilliant idea. I went to school for it. We were actually playing Friday the 13th on Xbox, and that's how we started talking to each other. And it was just something that immediately pulled my interest. But it is a lot of work. You go into layers of thinking, oh yeah, this is going to be, we just go on and we record it and we each has her thoughts and what we're going to talk about. But as Keith said, it's just very rewarding. And I feel like all the conversations we have had have been informative and fun and hopefully engaging to you all. And yeah.
I know I've enjoyed listening to your earlier podcast. They kill me. And I was really grateful when you guys brought me on. I was only supposed to be on for that one episode. I believe it was the Bad Seed, if I remember correctly. No, I mean it was
The Innocents.
That one
Came in on The Innocents.
I remember now. The Innocents, yes, yeah. And I've really enjoyed it. It's almost like therapy because I look forward to talking to you two every time we do a podcast because I just laugh all the time. I don't know if people know those behind the scenes, but we fuck up a lot. And it's just funny how you try to catch yourself, you try to keep some kind of fluid conversation going. And then you get those aha moments, and then you get those moments where, okay, I forgot what I was going to say, or I lost my notes or whatever. But I mean, it's totally enjoyable. I love it. It's just been a lot of fun. I'm really grateful. I mean, I just look forward to it all the time. It's like a labor of love, and a lot of blood, sweat, and tears goes into it. I know that you and Keith work really hard on it. And I just want our listeners to know that, a lot of heart goes into this, and we hope you enjoy it because we definitely.
We're glad that you have stuck around and you've joined us because I feel like you add such another aspect or layer to what we're trying to do here, and I'm very happy that you're part of this now.
I keep waiting for the hate emails. Where's all the hate emails? Where's our stalkers?
Well, we definitely push the line, sometimes in some of our episodes, and I think that's what makes us unique.
Yeah, I think Keith's got a couple stalkers.
Yeah.
Clarice.
I've had my stalkers in my days, yes. And they've all been kind of mentally deranged as well, which I'm quite lucky for.
Part of also what we try to do is when we collaborate on the season, we really look at different content that each of us have explored and really appreciate, and we try to come up with at least 3 to 4 ideas and then sort of build out the theme of the month. And you kind of get this mix of things that Keith really love and things that I really love and things that Vickie really love. And it really just shows you the continuity, different continuity that we each bring and that we appreciate, that we want to share with our fans. One of the episodes that I brought to the sort of picture was The Road by Cormac McCarthy. It was something that I read a long time ago, and then the movie I watched, and it was something that I really wanted to share with Keith, and I think it was Cassandra at the time, and it was something that I felt had a story and depth of the story that I wanted to pull this in all. Keith, what was one of your sort of favorites of last season that you kind of brought to the table?
Well, the one that I really liked the most is probably The Haunting, when we covered Shirley Jackson, because I got to speak to Shirley Jackson's son, Laurence Hyman Jackson.
Oh, that was amazing.
And I have to say that I did very well not being too geeky around him, which, I think, unfortunately, we had some, doing the podcast, we also figured out like technical hitches and stuff. We did have some technical hitches with that interview with him, but I was really good. And we also had a really good guest co-host with us at that time, Sue, with Robert. And I think he really added. He was a big Shirley Jackson fan. And he really added. He had a dark comic. He produced a dark comic book of Shirley Jackson's works and works inspired by him. And so he was really able to add to that. And I really liked covering Never Hike Alone with Vincent di Sante, where we just had, it was just I'm going to say one-on-one, but it was actually a two-on-one conversation with him about him making the film and, his career and stuff. And I thought that
was a really great little film.
Yeah, I actually love that that was the first sort of fan fiction that we explored. And I definitely want to also say that as you all are listening to that, to us, if there's anything that you think would be interested in covering, please feel free to mention. It doesn't hurt. We kind of have a lineup already sort of set, but we're always open to new ideas, especially the fan fiction route, because Vincent di Sante, that movie still, I show it to all my friends and I'm like, you got to watch this. And I try not to spoil it.
It's excellent. I loved it.
I mean, I'm also very pleased that with all the people who guest co-hosted with us, they're all coming back for season 2, which I guess they had a good time with us. And I think that's something as well. Sometimes when you're putting this together and you're doing your podcast and I edit it, the editing process takes about 3 to 4 hours, editing it together and stuff like this. And, and you put it out there, but you're hoping that the guest co-hosts that you have on board do enjoy themselves. And when I was putting season 2 together, everyone that came in for season 1, I did send an invite out to, and they've all come back. No one said no. They're all so pleased. Most of them are coming back for 2 or 3 episodes, which is even, it shows that they actually enjoyed doing this with us. And I say that's quite a stroke on the back for a person, or for our egos. I mean, my ego is so big that sometimes I have to turn sideways to get my head out the door, but hey, that's life. So
you just got a strong-willed character, okay? If people only knew what you were saying behind the scenes.
I mean, it's quite interesting. I mean, when we look at our first episode, I mean, when basically the inspiration for the podcast came to, I was always quite interested in podcasts. And one of my favorite podcasts is to 2 young ladies out there, Andrea and I forgot what their other name is, but I'll come back to. But they do a thing called the Faculty of Horror podcast. And that's what really got me into podcasts. And every month to this day, I still look forward to what they say and everything that they do. And I thought, and I also, before this point, I was a director of a media company that we actually mentioned authors. Started out as Media Bitch. Then through trials and tribulations, we changed that to MB Literature Agency, which I closed not too long, almost a year ago now.
Right.
And I always wanted to do a podcast, but then I thought, instead of like putting it off, let's just do it. So I made an announcement that I was going to do a podcast with MB Literature Agency, and then started that before, as I was closing down the company, and just went forward. And as I said before, Vickie worked with me with the Literature Agency. That's how I met Vickie. But Vickie and I met we were doing a film together, which had its own trials and tribulations, which we won't hear now, because if I do mention it, we'll probably be sued for libel. But it wasn't the best experience of our lifetime, but it did bring us together. We did get a film that has really bad sound design on it, I should add, because apparently the person was too lazy to hold the mic up. But hey, that's something else.
I was there, yeah. I can vouch for that.
Yeah.
Sound is very important. Just to all your listeners.
Very important. Hold that fucker up, yeah.
And I mean, I came across with Vickie basically because a mutual friend, Hans Wilder, who I went to school with, was trying to get an 1812 movie off the ground, and I was going to write the script for him. And I started writing the script, and then through trials and tribulations, Vickie came on board because she was doing work with Hans, and we met that way. And then Hans backed out of the project, leaving me, the cat holding the bag sort of situation. And Vickie and I worked closely on that. And then she came on board in the literary agency. And then Jon, as Jon said before, we were gaming and we got on quite well. We quite liked the same things. And that's what brought him on board for the podcast. And I said that's worked. We had 2 other ones that we started out with the podcast, but one didn't enjoy our company as much, and he left after Planet of the Apes. And the other one,
I can't imagine that.
Well, I think also too, what you find is like trial and error, right? So Keith and I always have had a flow of conversation. I think if I remember correctly, Keith saying I had the gift for the gab, which means I talk a lot. And there are those who don't talk as much, and I think are sometimes awkward. And it's, I would say, for the faint of heart, if anyone's interested in doing podcasts, test the waters for yourself and test, if you're adding other layers to it, like test it out and see how it runs. And I think with as Keith was mentioning those past 2, folks, I think we've always sort of flowed together. And then Vickie comes along, excuse me. Then Vickie comes along and we flow well with her as well. So.
That's because I'm from New York.
From New York.
I think what also that enabled us to do as well is I think if anyone's starting out a podcast, the best thing is trial and error. I think when we first got into it, we had an idea what we wanted to do, but I wouldn't say that we were fully flushed in that idea, and it wasn't totally realized. And then after the first one, we tried the second one, and we tinkered around with it a little bit more. And then I think as we got on, after about, 4th or 5th episode, things started to flow, as things started to click a little bit easier. And I think that we knew what path we were on. And I also like the idea that we started off with one way of looking at things. Or our main, subjective basically was, for the first 4 episodes, it was book to screen. And we discussed the original book. And then we would discuss the original film. And I thought it did work, but I also realized is that, we did get picked up by a radio station in LA. If you're listening to this, God bless you, Powercast 97.9. And they actually demanded more episodes. But I think, at first I wasn't quite sure, but I think that actually pushed us. So actually we were able to take our idea and expand on it. And that's why we do now the 2 for 1. And next season, we'll be doing an Alfred Hitchcock season. And then we got some other episodes lined up, which they become a bit more clearer as we will share with you. But I think that actually able us to open things up a bit more. I mean, it also opened us up to like doing stuff like Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, which is like a Russ Meyer film, which is like, like a special Christmas gift for people. Or we took holidays and like did something a bit different, whether it was Reefer Madness, where we took like a propaganda film about the evils of marijuana that actually was turned into like a hit musical. And we were able to cover that. So we were able to do like the subquote, books to screen and everything in between, and quotation marks. And we were able to do that and everything in between. And I think that actually helped us a little bit more as well. And it actually made us open minds as well. That's what I quite like about doing this is that I am now reading work that I've always had on my plate to do, like whether it was Planet of the Apes or whether it was The Road I probably never would have gone to. The Innocents, I probably never would have read that book, which is Turn to Screw. And it actually made me open my mind to these books where the original were, and then to the films I actually love. And I say that, I don't know how many, our listeners are good and they seem to enjoy us, but at the same time, I think I get more out of it than from that as well, which I think has been quite rewarding for myself on a personal level.
Yeah, and I'm glad that we challenged our, Keith was the one who sort of put our mission statement, which is, books to screen and everything in between, on our website. And I'm glad that we sort of challenge ourselves to think outside of the box from that, because we were sort of just, looking at it from a book and film, and then we started now, at a physical and other, like we now talk about series and television series or content series, I guess you call it now. So it's like, to me, it's like, I'm glad that we always have sort of evolved. And I think it's important if you are in a podcast to, yes, you do try to have a run through of events and you try to kind of stick to the format so that way you can kind of stay on point per episode, but you, to be able to deviate and course correct when you
We
want to
deviate
kind
a
of.
lot.
Yeah, we do.
And there's
And I
lots
love
of
that.
tangents going on.
Love that because it allows us to have fun. And, so definitely if you are considering a podcast, have fun with it. Enjoy the conversations. We each bring different aspects of the content, what we're, showcasing to our fans.
And don't be afraid to take the road less traveled, because a lot of people, like I said, I mean, a lot of these books and a lot of these movies that we do, some, especially younger listeners, probably never heard of it. And like we're different, that for the most part aren't like that recent or in the now. And and it's great to dust them off and bring them back to life again is what I enjoy about it, because I haven't read a lot of these books in a long time, or I haven't really looked at a particular movie from the point of view I have now. And I think like I said, I hope whoever's out there wants to podcast, do something different, think outside the box, like John said, and don't afraid to be different.
Yeah.
Be different.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, I think that when I was originally putting the podcast, I came up with a bunch of different ideas, and I do listen to podcasts. I was listening to the Stephen King podcast, which is not done by Stephen King, but by fans of his, and I was quite into that because
The Losers Club.
The Losers Club, that's it. And because Stephen King's so vast in his, films and television series and books, I've kind of fallen off the boat slightly with keeping up to date with that, because there's so much that they do. But, I quite like that. I also listen to, people just doing authors and just doing books. We do have a friend of ours, Jason White, who does the Darkness Dwells podcast, where he interviews authors.
Excellent podcast, and he's a good author as well.
Yes, and he does that with another author, Michael Schultz, which he's a really amazing author as well. And I quite like what they do, but when we're coming up with the concept of this, I figured, I've listened to quite a few, and I decided that there was a hole in the market, and that's the reason why we do the Literary License podcast, is because it is reading the original book, and then, in the first mission statement part of it, and then watching the original film. I mean, we did come up with some complications. There's sometimes the book is sometimes hard to find, or we had to, like for instance, when we did the Christmas Story, that was actually based on a book by Jean Shepherd, which is basically, the Christmas Story is basically a very short section of that book. But we read the whole book, and we were able to actually enjoy the book. I don't think I'd actually would have read that book without doing A Christmas Story. And I'm glad that I did, because it's now one of my favorite books now.
Yeah. And it also just gave what I love about the fact that, I read, Keith, you read a lot because you also do reviews.
He's always been reading ever since I met him.
It's like you absorb, I'm in awe of that, because I wish I had, my eyes get tired very quickly. So I wish I could read as much as you do. But to be able to take a story that you think like Christmas, and that the book is going to be the same, and it's actually a mashup of 3 separate movies that were produced, and so you kind of get that it's like a little novellas, of the stories of this kid's life to an adult. But I love that, because it has always challenged me with anything we read, that you're not going to always get the same story that you're seeing in a movie. And so, or you might have read a book and then you haven't seen the film, and you say, oh, I never knew that they took that take in the movie. So I love that we're actually able to bring that to the table for our fans, because maybe they have seen Silence of the Lambs 100 times, but they've never read the book. And we encourage that, because there's layers to that onion that they're missing.
I mean, I even found that with, I think the weirdest translation I would have to be with one of my all-time favorite movies, which is Seven Faces of Dr. Lao.
Right.
And the reason why that's one of my all-time favorites is when I was a kid, there's 3 movies, well, actually 4 movies, that my mom, if they were on late at night, my mom used to let me stay up late and I wouldn't have to go to school the next day. And one of those was The Seven Faces of Dr. Lao. And it's always been like a favorite of my films, and then realizing it was based on a book called The Circus of Dr. Lao, which is like in Spain, like a huge book, which I wasn't even aware. But then to read the book and then see the film, it does add, I mean, the book is totally different from the film in a lot of ways, but in other ways, it's still like an aspect of the film, which is quite bizarre. And it actually makes you look at things a lot differently. I think that, whether it's, when we did Jaws, when you look at the Peter Benchley film with the bitch of a wife, and then you get the wife who's actually quite nice in the film. And then you get all these subplots that you don't get in the film. But then when you watch the film after reading the book, these subplots do bleed through in a weird way in the film that you didn't pick up the first time. And I like looking at films that I've seen 100 million times, like whether it's The Omen or The Exorcist, or even Tommy that we done the week prior to this. And it just opens up and you start looking at things differently with a lot more appreciation into them. And I think that's what the podcast for me has helped me do, is open my mind a bit more and to looking at subplots and characterizations and way plots are formed and the way that you have to condense things from one media to another. And I have to sit there and say that this has been quite a rewarding experience.
I love how too we've sort of partnered an idea too, because you had mentioned Murder by Death and I had mentioned Clue, and we said, oh, this would be a great duo to actually present to our fans. And I've Clue, I don't know how many freaking times, and to see Murder by Death, I was like, this is like a precursor to that. So it challenges me to always look for something that I think, oh, this is the excuse me, getting choked up. Hold on.
Well, I think Murder by Death, I have to admit, and Clue, probably my favorite, because I've forgotten how funny Clue especially was. I mean, if you're a Tim Curry fan, I mean, his energy is fantastic, and I just can't stop laughing at him. I miss him so badly. I wish, because he's just brilliant. And then there's Murder by Death. What were you saying about that, John?
Oh, I was just saying, as I was getting like choked up, Murder by Death, it was just something that you had this cast of characters and how they each played off of each other, and how it was a starting point for that specific comedic mystery genre I love. And I was like, well, how did I not see this? How did I miss this? And we will continue to, even in next season when we do Blazing Saddles and other movies similar to that comedic.
I can't wait for Blazing Saddles. One of my all-time favorites. Did more for race relations than anybody.
So we will always, here I go again. We will always try to explore, like horror and some science fiction and drama, but we all try to do comedy to break it up a bit, because that's, these are movies that I grew up with too as well, that I love sharing with our audience, because I'm sure they have their own like stories that they've loved or appreciated, and again, share with us any that you have considered that's part of your genre that you love, to. And
we're welcome and open to any comments any of you have, or even maybe a request or two if that's something that you might have missed that you all want to hear, or I think engage in. Oh, good luck for Americans.
I also like what that we've actually come around doing is we started off in one direction, but now we look at all kinds of different genres, and I'm quite enjoying that aspect of it, that we're not just horror, or we're not just science fiction, or we're not just fiction, and as you see, as we expand our repertoire in season 2, you'll realize that we've actually going through a lot more genres than I ever anticipated. But I quite like that. We did do comedy. We had done the musical. We've done a concept album to film. I mean, who would ever thought that we would have done that? I mean, that was kind of a last minute choice. And it was kind of, to let fans know in the interworkings of what's going on here. That was actually the interworkings to figure out how this would work when we go into when we do our December, Christmas episode, which we're doing Jesus Christ Superstar. So it's kind of the idea to see how this would work and how we can, advance on this. And I figured, I'm quite happy with how we, tackled Tommy, and I'm even more keen on doing Jesus Christ Superstar now. So, but I like the way that we're able to just expand on things, you know. Like when we did Jaws, we did Born with Teeth month, you know, and then we did like Near Dark and 30 Days a Night, and we took the thing where like you got 3 movies about predators, which are all done in different ways. You know, we got The Shark in the Water, of course, with Jaws, which is a phenomenal film, of course. And then we got like Near Dark, which is like a little known film, which is like vampires in a more realistic setting. And then we have the comic book, extravaganza, 30 Days a Night. And we're able to actually look at all the different ways of doing that.
That was a fun one though, because you had so much material you cover on that. And then you bring up a little known, movie Near Dark and then expand on that. Because a lot of people don't even know that movie exists, and there's a lot of fans out there that like horror. I think, I know me and Keith are horror freaks for sure, but he's got like Linda Blair dolls and everything else. I'm not near as bad as him. He's got a whole collection behind him half the time when I'm talking to him.
I mean, I have to say that one of the biggest surprises, from doing this podcast, I think was reading the book Hell House.
Oh my God! No shit!
I know.
It was like porn. I was like, I didn't even know that existed.
It kind of broke every taboo possible that you can imagine.
I know. Who'd have thunk that? Because I watched the movie. Like instead of Keith talk about monster movie matinee out of Syracuse when we were young, that we'd sit and watch with our moms when we were kids, and those movies would come out. They underlined it in the movie a little bit, but for the time and the authorship of the book, wow, it probably flew off the shelves because it was one of those dirty little secrets people wanted to read.
Well, for me, I read Valley of the Dolls once because, it's one of those trashy novels that you hear about, so you have to read. And Hell House has nothing on Valley of the Dolls. Valley of the Dolls was this really racy novel in its time. And you got Hell House, which basically is probably... I'm very rarely shocked. I work in psychiatry and some of this, and there's very little things that shock me. And Hell House did shock me, the book. The film, I'm always in love with film because I have Roddy McDowell is my geek crush guy sort of thing, and I don't know I don't know how much that is. I don't know if maybe it's him dressed as a monkey. Maybe I have this fascination with him. But once reading that book of Hell House, I just remember like reading it and like really getting into it. It was a real page turner, and once I started, I couldn't tear my eyes away from it. But meanwhile, in the back of my mind is again like, how in the hell are we going to cover this? How much can we get away with mentioning? And
if I remember correctly, we didn't care what we were mentioning at that point. So if anybody wants to go back and listen to it, it was a riot.
Well, I think it's like you're referencing, these conversations these people are having in the house, and especially just the whole history of Hell House is where most of the debauchery lives. And oh my God, did you just hear Siri?
What she said.
Like scary stuff like that that happened in Hell House. It was more. What was the character's name? It was the survivor. Him just nonchalantly saying, there's orgies and
oh gosh,
and you're just like, what?
We covered so many characters. Sometimes I have to go back into my notes because I digress.
Well, I never seen Ginger Bush written so many times in a book ever in my life either. So that was quite interesting.
Yeah.
And then there was, then they mentioned, that there was obviously, some girl on girl shit going on. And,
yeah.
There's a little something for everybody out there.
I do have to sit there and say, though, there have been stuff that I have read. I have to sit there and say, we've all been very, very honest on our podcast. And there has been some stuff that we've tackled that I didn't necessarily like the most. I've learned to appreciate it, but not like the most. And I have to sit there and say that one of the books has to be The Road. God, I appreciated it, but
I subjected him to that pain. I know.
I never wanted to see a child get killed so much in my life than when I watched The Road. He just irritated the hell out of me. Papa, Papa. It's like, oh God.
Our twisted minds, after we have these discussions, we were like, well, what if Rhoda had to deal with the boy?
Oh my God!
On the vaccine, we have these twisted mashups of like who against who,
Well, I have to
Like
say
that.
that I think that we did have a guest co-host on that episode, which is Cassandra Swan, the award-winning poet. And I do think that I think we made her a bit uncomfortable when we were talking about who we would cannibalize if this ever should happen. I mean, I think she was quite amused through her horror of that conversation, but it was quite funny. I mean, we did look at some bizarre things, like The Strangers was quite an interesting one. I know Vickie didn't like the film that much.
I did. Now the problem with that was there was no closure. I mean, it was just
which I'm fine with. Like, I'm on a dispute that I never like always the happy ending. You know, and I'm sure we'll be covering movies that are like that you don't have the happiest.
Well,
of
you know,
endings.
just like Liv Tyler. It's like, come on, grow some.
Yeah,
you know, don't
I think that's my fault with The Strangers. It's like, I love the premise of it. I love that the people with the mask breaking into a house. But what failed me on The Strangers has the fact that, and I love the ending. I like you know, an open-ended ending like that. I like horror films that have open-ended ending.
It is an open ending.
But I had difficulty when you have main characters do fucking stupid stuff. And you know, I kind of expect that in like a Friday the 13th film. And I love Friday the 13th films for this, because they are full of stupid people. But when you got people who are supposed to be intelligent doing stupid things, sometimes I find it a bit hard to handle. And Liv Tyler, I mean, you know, if you want to know my thoughts on Liv Tyler, listen to the Strangers episode. I won't refresh people's.
But so, you know, too, we always take like similar themes, like, you know, The Stranger, and next season we're creating a month sort of around, you know, being contained or being isolated from in a remote environment, like we're doing The Room, and we're doing I think Triangle and Frozen and Lifeboat. So like we take movies that we did from this season, said to ourselves how to create them around, and we like to interconnect them in certain ways, whether it's same director or, you know, similar actors within films. So we always try to be very thoughtful about what we select and how we approach that.
Yeah,
and it's good to hear different opinions, because there's a lot of, like, you know, our Tommy podcast that's coming out, and it's always good to you know, kind of, well, we all have a different view on things, and it we don't always agree on everything, and I think that gives, you know, more chemistry to our, you know, to what we're doing, because we try to stay on track when we're trying to explain our point of view. But like I said, we always go off on tangents and start talking about other bullshit that has absolutely nothing to do with. But we get back there eventually, though.
Well, and I also like how each of you challenged me to think about something I didn't see within a specific story that I might have missed based on how. I mean, when we did when we did episode, I saw the characters in that in a certain way that you each saw in other ways, and I think we kind of were able to take all that and bring it together. And I love that, because it's like we collaborate in this thought of what these characters are and how they interact with each other.
I mean, I don't know if this is one of my strengths or weaknesses, but I tend to go into the psychological framework of the characters like the real people.
I don't think you can help yourself.
Yeah, I think also it's sometimes you want to dive deep into that, and you want to like look at the characters. You want to look at that character's sort of nuances and what makes them what they are. And the difference, obviously, from the book than the film is you hardly ever get the internalization that's going on. Like a perfect example is Father, Damien from The Exorcist. Like you get a whole different take on that character that from the book than you do the film, because you get to hear all the internal workings. But you specifically, Keith, I think it's because it's part of what you do. So,
yeah, that's why. Yeah, he's always got the scientific standard behind the logistics of any book or a movie.
Yeah,
especially The Exorcist. That was, well, what was Father? Father Karras. Yeah. Everybody had a different take on Father Karras. And like when we were discussing the book, like the book has so much more going on in it that it doesn't quite touch on all the.
I would say
going.
I know I can't. I think I can guess what Keith's favorite character.
Okay, here we go.
What is your least favorite character, Vickie?
My least favorite character probably was Liv Tyler.
Oh yeah, Stranger.
She did. Yeah. I just hate the typical woman falling and breaking your ankle kind of routine. Basically, it's just like, if someone's trying to kill you, I would try to knock them 9 ways to Sunday. That's just all there is to it. It's like, just don't lay down for it. But I don't know. Keith had a lot of characters. Keith, who was your least favorite character?
My least favorite character has to be the boy from the road. I'm sorry.
I knew it.
Even reading him, I was annoyed. And I was like, I appreciated the drama that he was going through, with his father. And I liked the relationship between him and his father. But I'm sorry, but if I was his father, I would have ate him. Pure and simple. I would have gone starving.
I would have ate him.
I know that Cormac McCarthy is known as the America's greatest author, modern author, and I did feel a bit cold after reading the book. But I say he's my least favorite character. I do have some guilty pleasures that I liked, but I have to sit there and say, like, as far as books are concerned, I was very disappointed in the Amityville Horror book. I loved that book as a kid. Rereading it, I realized what a piece of shit this book is. Badly written. It's like, and I was like reading it. The more I got into it, I was so just, it's like something that I read when I was a kid. I was so into it. You're talking about someone who went to the library and got all the information about the faux murders and the Lutzes, and I was collecting them on microfiche. And I get these printouts were black and in those days you had microfiches before computer folks, and you had to go to the library, and I divulged all the stuff. I did art project where I remodeled the house and everything, and then that's it. Haven't read it since then. Here we are 30 some odd years later, 34 some odd years later, and rereading the book, and I'm like, what in the hell was I thinking? It was a bit like watching Dirty Dancing, and like when you watch Dirty Dancing for the first time, you think, what a great movie, and you watch it and like, what a piece of shit this is. It's kind of like that. Or Flashdance. Like, I remember seeing Flashdance, like, oh, I love Flashdance. This is great. And then you watch it now, and you're like, what the fuck was I thinking? How many people was that? What the fuck was I thinking in my life? So
we'll have some pieces that are like timeless pieces, and then we'll have others that were like, okay, my perspective has changed since I was younger.
Well, your perspective does change. That's why I think it's a good. Well, we got younger listeners, I know, and I mean, they might appreciate, because a lot of people are missed out on this. Like we're even older than you, and we've seen things that you're now seeing that you didn't think about. And I mean, and it goes back and forth between us all. We bounce it off each other.
Well, I mean, what was the worst book that you read, John?
Yeah, about the Amityville Horror. That's an awful book. What was that, Keith?
I said, what was the worst book that both of you read that we had to cover?
I would have to say Dr. Law wasn't the worst. It was the most difficult because perspective-wise kept sort of changing. It took me a few times to kind of read it over and over. To it's a short book. It's almost like, to me, almost a novella in some ways. There's a lot of themes going on with the different characters. So I think it was not my least favorite, but just kind of, I had to think a lot trying to read it.
I have to agree with John on that one because I like The Exorcist and a lot of books we read. Dr. Law was just a little, I don't know, it was almost felt like required reading for high school. Mm-hmm. They got that, and it was you did have to follow it. I'm kind of ADHD here in my old age, I guess.
No.
And I have to really concentrate on stuff when it has all that in there. Like, there's the mythology, there's the plots, there's drama, there's everything that has to tie in together. So that one just kind of spaced me out a little bit. But I still enjoyed it. So I can't really say I hated any book that I read.
I'm sorry, I have to disagree with you, bastards. The Circus of Dr. Lau is fantastic. To be honest, because this is my second reading of it, I actually enjoyed it more on the second reading. So much so that I actually went and bought a special edition of it with all the original pictures in it that were in the original printing.
I forgot about the photos. I did it. It is wonderful that the photos there.
But I actually, you know, I experienced it differently, but I do think it might have something more to do with the fact that this is my second reading of it. I remember the first time I did read it, I did find it a bit hard going. Like the turning of the screw, I found slightly hard going, and it kind of makes me wonder. Like we're covering Dracula in next season, and that's kind of written in the same kind of exact way, the old Victorian prose sort of thing. And
I love that book.
Yeah, well, it's gonna be interesting because I have never actually read Dracula. I never read the book of Dracula.
Lots of sexual repression.
Yeah, that's just living in England. So, but yeah, so it's gonna be quite interesting. But I found the Turning of the Screw a book that I really enjoyed it, but it's interesting to look at, like, you know, if you look at what we've read so far, I mean, we've dealt with books that were like published in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. And even I don't think we've actually bypassed the 80s yet and anything modern yet. But then we've, you know, in the 1800s and the early 1900s, we read books that like written, and it's quite interesting to see the way stories are put together and the way they're written and how that's all changed. And I, you know, as they were saying before, I do, a lot of publishers send me books to read, and I read books, and they're all modern, of course, that are going to be released soon. They're either going to be released in a couple months, or they're released, you know, a couple days after my review. And it's quite interesting to like refer back to all these books written at different periods of time and how they written. I mean, when you look at The Bad Seed and the way that's written, you can see how the modern novel is progressed. But yet you do have like the beginnings of a modern novel with like The Bad Seed, and then you got your 70s novels, as we covered, like in Hell House and Jaws, which is basically, or even the Amityville Horror is a book from the 70s, and they are books that basically, there's not a lot of emotional depth in the books. It's all about what you want to put into it, which is quite interesting, you know, because now, like when you read a book, everything's quite emotionally driven. You know, the characters are quite emotionally written and stuff like this. But then, you know, you look at this other stuff, and it's quite interesting to see how books have changed. And filming technique has changed a lot. I mean, there's, you know, we've covered some modern stuff and some, you know, old black and white films, and even the way storytelling changed in film formats quite interesting.
It is interesting to see how a book that was written, you know, into now, because I'm sure a lot of people don't read Byron or you know, the Canterbury Tales and things like that. And it's just interesting to see, because it gives you a view, what was it like back then? Because I'm a big history buff, and I'm always interested to see how life was. And when you read books that have been written, you know, even 15 years ago, you can tell that society was in a certain stage. And it's just interesting to see how it comes out, talking, thinking. And it was interesting to see how, especially books written in the 50s, are trying to get away with a little sexual undertone and innuendo to the point of, you know, things that we're not supposed to talk about, we're openly discussing now, but they sneak it in there.
Which is, again, it's interesting because you see now, you know, especially within films, the sheer blatancy of sexual overtone. And, you know, but back then when you watch some of the movies that we saw, like Beyond the Valley of Dolls and things like that, you might laugh at that and just, you know, see that as something like, oh, but for that time, that was pushing lines right there. And especially like the start of that was, you know, very reminiscent of the killings, the Manson killing. So that was, you know, I remember watching going, what the hell is going on? And I can only imagine for those people at that time, like just being in shock. Like, I can't believe I'm watching this.
Which movie was that?
Beyond the Valley of the Dolls.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, it was interesting. You guys were talking about, you know, Beyond the Valley of the Dolls and the Charles Manson killings and all that stuff came out, because it kind of struck a chord with me as to how, remind you of other things. Now that I'm older, we actually had a serial killer in Watertown that became quite popular, you know, and it kind of makes you think, you know, what was going on with people back then and how people were scared. and how, when it's just all about, I guess, current events, they call it, I guess. What authors are, translating into that particular
something I think I really love that we do is explore movies that have a sort of base of reality. And, when you look at that movie, Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, and you have Amityville Horror, The Strangers, a lot of these movies they become fictionalized with the characters and things, but are based on reality. And I think, Keith mentioning like Amityville, the obsession with Amityville still goes and is still deep within a lot of people's minds because they don't really know what has happened. And so I think we also try to look for movies like that challenge like piece of reality. It is what's true and what's happening, and where is the mystery in finding the
That's
truth.
true about the Amityville Horror, because people are still so fixated with that. I've got a ghost hunting team, and we like to go out there and do our thing. That people are, it's just that is like it's almost like biblical to ghost hunters to want to get into that house, to see what was going on. And I think that people still read that book.
Well, even like when we covered Across the Universe, which is basically a jukebox musical that's more of like an opera based on Beatles music. And here they take all the Beatles songs and actually make a story out of them. And there's very little dialogue in this film. And, there's a lot of truth in that as well, because you do go cover through the 60s and the Vietnam and what's going on with the relationships and the differences between London and America at the same time period. And, it's quite interesting to actually see the way you can find your moments of truth and things that actually shouldn't work.
Yeah. And I love that soundtrack, by the way, because I remember seeing the trailer years ago, and it was one of those, I want to see that movie. And Keith had brought that up, and you had said to listen to the soundtrack. And I have that on repeat in my house. So every time I go to do something, I go, I'll just put that on.
It is excellent. I enjoyed it too. I'd never watched it until the songs of the Beatles to be just put into a story that actually makes sense with very little dialogue, like you specified.
So, John, when you're doing the dishes, are you like singing along with it then? Yeah.
Is it a shower thing with you?
Yeah.
Oh my God, your neighbors are probably wondering what the fuck. And
if I have to hear Dear Evan Hansen one more damn time.
And the fans just love me.
So what we'll do is we're going to cut to a commercial break, and we'll come back. We're going to come to coming attractions and discuss what's going to be happening in season 2. So hold on to your seatbelts, buddies. Here we go.
Let's play a game. I will ask you yes or no questions. Ready? Do you have a rocking chair to relax on? Do you have space to store your toddler's toys if an unexpected guest came over? Can you lay down comfortably on your couch? If your answer is no to one or more of these questions, then you need the new IKEA catalog. Visit IKEA at Cairo Festival City and get your free copy. Enjoy 1,000 new ideas and more than 2,000 new lower prices. IKEA 2018 catalog. Make room for life.
IKEA. We'll be right back. After we go to the bathroom.
Amazon is here to make your life easier. By just the tap of a button, you can turn the camera on your phone to your own personal shopping list. Introducing Flow. Just tap the camera icon onto the search bar, and you can find whatever it is you're looking for, right on Amazon. Faster than scanning a barcode and typing the name of your item into the search engine. Besides, searching with words is so 2012. Save time and money. Amazon, where shopping meets effortless.
Welcome back, folks. So we are going to start a discussion of what's coming for season 2. Should just mean that to sort of go or play on how we have evolved the podcast from last year, we're actually adding in a third episode, if you will, for the month that will be hinged on Alfred Hitchcock. So we're really excited about that. Vickie, do you want to kind of talk about any of the episodes for season 2 that interest you the most? Like, what's your favorite one that you're going to want to talk about?
Well, probably The Witch, which we're tying into the Pacific East, because I have not seen that one. Everybody keeps telling me I have to see it. I haven't seen it yet.
Oh, it's good.
That's definitely one that I need to watch. Jesus Christ Superstar, totally love it. When I was younger, every time we go on a trip, I can sing the whole musical score, much to the dismay of everybody in the car. You know, there's several I can't wait to do. Dracula and Love at First Bite, hysterical movie, like George Hamilton and that. House of Dark Shadows and Trilogy of Terror. I'm looking forward to that. And definitely Blazing Saddles, one of my all-time favorite comedies, because it's just funny as shit. And it's just, if it doesn't make you smile, there's something seriously wrong with you.
What about you, Keith?
I'm actually looking forward to starting off the season with Psycho. And what I'm going to quite like about Psycho is that we actually got 2 of our special guests from last season joining us, which is John Hunt and Vincente di Sante, to come discuss Psycho. But I quite like that month as well, because we're also going to be doing Homicidal, which is a William Castle film, and Dressed to Kill, which is Brian De Palma. And I'm a huge Brian De Palma film. If it's got Brian De Palma's name on it, whether it's Carrie or Sisters, which we'll also be covering, or whether it's Phantom of the Paradise or Obsession or Blowout, you know, I'm really on board with that. And we're also doing Hitchcock's Frenzy, which is another serial killer film. You know, with Dressed to Kill and Homicidal, we got a new co-host, special guest co-host coming called Will Mahler, which I think our audiences will really enjoy him. And then Matthew Brockmeyer, who's just won a bunch of awards for his book, Kind Nepenthe, which he came with us last year, season 1. He's going back for season 2, and he's going to be joining us. And I'm really looking forward to a lot of special guest people coming back. See, Derrick Miller's back doing Robert Kirby, who did the Haunting with us, he's back for quite a few episodes. And we got some new guest people coming on board as well that, you know, some of them are actually becoming quite well-to-known authors and stuff like that. And I'm really excited about doing Rosemary's Baby with Robert Kirby as well, because he's a big fan of that film and book. So I know he's much as big a fan as that he is of Shirley Jackson and The Haunting. So I know he's going to be very special to share on that. And we got a new author called Dwayne Scott Kearney coming in as well, and he's got this fantastic book. He's a antiques dealer out of Chicago, and he's got this book called Selling Dead People's Things, and he is such a big fan of Rosemary's Baby. So I'm actually looking forward to revisiting Rosemary's Baby, the book and the film. So, but I
haven't read Rosemary's Baby yet. That's one book I have not read yet, and so I'm sure you got a smile on your face now. So I'm assuming that it's going to be good.
It's going to be bloody good. Rosemary's Baby. I actually for me, I'm really excited that we're kind of mashing things up a bit. So one episode, we're going to be covering the original Stepford Wives as well as Get Out, which are very similar in theme to each other. We're also doing Sisters and Goodnight Mommy, which Goodnight Mommy is such a twisted movie. But I love that we're mixing past with the present, if you will, and kind of doing a comparison of those movies.
There's a lot of there's a few in here that I haven't seen in a while personally, like Burnt Offerings. That was one of my favorites. I haven't seen it never. You know, it's good that we're doing this. I enjoy a lot of these, so I'll probably keep my mouth yapping on that one.
And I remember Trilogy of Terror. My brother is showing me that. I probably shouldn't have seen it. But
isn't that with the little doll and you can hear him like something?
I love that character. So great.
I was afraid to go to the bathroom for a long time, and I would jump out of bed. I was afraid that it was going to come out from underneath my bed and start doing the little thumping thing.
Well, any of our listeners out there, if they know where I can actually get that voodoo doll, I've been looking for years to get a little voodoo doll, that one from Trilogy of Terror.
It's got to be out there somewhere.
Someone asked me, it has to own that as a collectible. They have to.
Oh yes, they got to release that. That's ultimate. It's one of my There's a couple things I need to add to my collection, and that's one of them. To my fantastic doll collection. I mean, I do got my Vincent Price bobblehead, my Vincent Price doll, which I love.
I know.
I mean, to let the listeners know how we come together with our episodes, what we did in this case, because now there's three, now we have our three co-hosts, firmly in place now for all of season 2. What happened was that we divided the year up. So we gave each of us took 3 months that we would cover, 4 months each. So we all came up with like themes and movies for each of our months. So it's been quite interesting. It's like with Vickie's come up with her 4 months worth of work and stuff to cover. Jon, same, and myself. And what I quite like is that 299 pounds. Oh, sorry, I'm like, show me a picture of the voodoo doll. I'm an extra celebratory masturbation material coming on now.
eBay find of the day.
But what I quite like about it is that I listened to like a bunch of interesting stuff that I can't wait to share with Jon and Vickie, and they've done with me as well. Like neither one of them we're going to be covering the French film Inside, and any of our listeners know anything about this film, they know it is a truly demented film to be covering, and one of the most grossest films, shocking films I've ever seen. And I can't wait to cover some of these. But even like some of the stuff that Vickie suggested, Helter Skelter, which I'm very familiar with. Helter Skelter, the 2 miniseries. I'm very familiar with Charles Manson. But it's one of those books that, because it's so thick, I've actually kind of shied away from. And I do like true crime horror, but it's actually going to give me a chance to actually read that. And it's
actually not a bad book. It's long, but it's actually not bad.
And I'm even looking forward to actually reading Dracula, which was Jon's choice, because I probably never would have read Bram Stoker's Dracula, because I'm very familiar with the 1930s classic, and I've seen the Ford Coppola Bram Stoker's Dracula version of it with very bad accents from American actors. But but it'd be interesting to actually see it. And I've done what I do when we had the season planned out for probably about 3 or 4 months before recording this episode. We've been planning things out for a while. Even to the simple fact that we're actually started planning season 3 already. We already got ideas and stuff that we're turning around. But like with Dracula, as I started, downloading the books, finding the books, and outsourcing the films and stuff like this, and for the year. And I did find this fantastic audiobook version of Dracula, where they actually take all the letters are written in the audiobook, and they're read by the people who wrote the letters. So it's all done from that point of view. So I know I'm going to really enjoy getting into Dracula and listening to the audiobooks and actually diving deep into some of these films, especially like Alfred Hitchcock, who to me is a god. I'm a huge Alfred Hitchcock fan. It probably explains my love for Brian De Palma and Dario Argento, because they use a lot of the filming techniques of Alfred Hitchcock. So,
yeah, and I recommend, if people are not huge readers, please do not let that deter you from at least trying to get the content as an audible, because I think it's one of these where sometimes I will read the book, read the book and then listen to it as well to get the context of the differentiation of the voices and stuff in the audible. So definitely, if you're deterred from joining the conversation or being a part of the conversation just because you're not a big reader, because I know a few of my friends like, I wouldn't be interested in your podcast. I'm like, why? Oh, I don't read. I'm like, well,
I don't read.
Listen to an audible.
I know. That's why my husband's a teacher. And I always ask him, I go, he doesn't, because I don't like to read. And I go, you're a teacher, you don't like reading, because I don't want to read anymore. I go to read it in college. Yeah. And it's just like, well, don't let it deter you. I go, pick it up, and you might actually like it.
Well, you're missing like really great stories, that, because you just don't want to pick up a book and read. I get it, because I'm not a math person. Those same people love mathematics and they love equations and all that. I'm like, no. So I get it.
I know, that's like me trying to do math. Not doing that. But I mean, so a lot of the stuff y'all suggested I have not read, and I'm kind of looking forward to reading it, because, like I said, I haven't read everything, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners haven't. And when you read the book and then you see the movie, especially, you get a chance to like view things that, you just see how like words like Keith says bleed through in the movie. and then maybe you can understand the characters in the movie when you got, the backlighting on what actually happened in the novel to begin with.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some. I mean, I have to say, when we were coming through, I mean, there's some things that we had to, when putting this season together. I remember that, we all came forth with our selections and stuff like this, and then some of them we had to tinker around with. I think one of Jon's episodes, you really wanted to do Thing, and which we are going to cover, but then we realized actually the Thing is actually a remake of a classic 50s film, which is actually based on a short story.
Right.
So before we could put it on our list, I remember we did a bit of research, and three of us all put our research together, and we actually found the short story. So now we're going to, we're going to be doing The Thing from Another World, and we're going to be covering The Thing as and the faculty together, which is quite interesting.
Yeah,
but it'll be.
And we sent it off that because the theme we sent it off of, like, what we were trying to do is like look at themes and then building off of that. And we kind of, like, I also wanted to cover the faculty, and I was like, well, what could we cover that's similar to that,
And it's quite interesting to, like, actually see, like, the original. I've never actually seen the original 1950s film. I've seen clips of it, like in the movie Halloween. It's the film the kids are watching when Curtis is babysitting, and John Carpenter uses his black and white film footage of The Thing in a lot of his movies. But I've never actually seen it, so I'm really interested in seeing that and to actually read the short story that it's based on. So I'm actually looking forward to that.
I have to read the short story because, like I said, we didn't know. I didn't know it was a short story to begin with, and I have watched the old one a couple times. And was it Kurt Russell?
Kurt Russell. Yeah. Well, it's now a classic film. I mean, it's one of those films that flopped when it came out, but now it's like one of the biggest films ever. I mean, it's like got
a cult following, something.
Precisely, but I mean, a cult following so much that it almost seems like it was a blockbuster when it came out. It's only when, looking at it, doing, as we do a lot of research and looking through things, and Wikipedia is our new best friend.
Right.
Websites of that ilk. But, then you realize that actually the Thing lost money. It wasn't a hit. But, in my recollection, it feels like it was a huge blockbuster, which is interesting to actually look at things like that. I mean, when we were compiling the list as well, I have to sit there and say there was a lot of I'm excited about the stuff that I picked because I can't wait to share it with people. And, that has to do with things like The Girl Next Door and American Crime, which are, we're doing a true crime month, which is quite interesting, which is Vickie's choice of Helter Skelter. But The Girl Next Door and American Crime is this really interesting story. It's hard to believe that took place in the 50s about this girl who was living with her aunt, and her aunt used to invite the neighborhood kids over to torture and eventually kill this girl. And it's quite a harrowing story, but, Jack Ketchum, who's a really good friend of ours, through the literary agency, we corresponded quite well. And unfortunately, he did die about 6 months ago, which is quite sad.
He was a good guy.
Yeah, but he wrote a book called The Girl Next Door, and we're going to actually be covering the movie this is based off. But the interesting thing is that he wrote a version of the murders that took place, but then they did another version for Showtime, which is actually the murders themselves, called An American Crime. And I like the way that we're going to be able to compare the two, a fictionalized version against the realistic version of the same story, which is quite interesting. And I'm really happy with some of the demented films I found, like Sister and Goodnight Mommy, and The Other. Not The Others with Nicole Kidman, but The Other, which is based on a Tom Tyronson novel. And I'm quite excited about sharing some of this stuff with them and seeing how freaked out I can make them.
I'm looking forward to Lifeboat. Lifeboat's one of my favorites too.
I'm also going to say I love that we're kind of ending the season on a comedic note, because we're doing like Strangers on the Train, and we're doing High Anxiety, which is another one of my favorites, and Blazing Saddle together, and North by Northwest, and those I really look forward to those, because I love that we also go into the comedic beat of things, because it's so much fun to talk about those types of movies.
Well, it's quite funny because we mentioned Alfred Hitchcock, and then we always mention that we need to do Mel Brooks, and it gave us the ample information to use to actually cover Blazing Saddle, but do High Anxiety, which is actually a piss take of all the Alfred Hitchcock films. So it's a good way to be ending our season too.
Yeah,
so which is quite good, and I quite I think we got a very interesting month, and I think a lot of people are going to be quite happy with how we cover stuff. And, and if you don't like a specific episode, I'm sure that our madness will turn you on in some form or shape.
Our allure.
Our unsanctimonious or conversations at times.
If something happens and we and our podcast makes you bipolar, let me know and I can tell you what the perfect drugs are. I can prescribe them to you.
It's the doctor. That's no lie.
But I think you're looking through the list, and if anyone is interested, you can find these on www.llpodcast.com under season 2, and we have everything listed there. We have a little brief detail about each of the episodes that we'll be covering next year, and I think that I think people will be quite happy with it. And if you're not, if you think we should cover something else or there's something else come to mind, let us know on our social media platforms, and we'll take that in advisement.
Yeah, we'd like to hear from y'all.
Yes. Yeah. We'll also be looking, I said before, we've already started planning season 3 already. So, get those comments in and we might be looking at those.
Yeah, might try to tie them on in.
Another good thing that, out of size of season 2 is that we got a lot of exciting things coming our way. I said before, we got a lot of special guest stars coming in our way. A lot of them from episodes past and some new ones that will be quite surprising. But we've also got a season 1 t-shirt that we'll be giving away starting in season 2 that I think the design should be out probably in September. So, stay tuned and we'll show you what the design is. And I think everyone's going to be quite chuffed and want to have a copy. But you cannot buy it. You can only get it through our competitions on our podcast. So you have to listen to make sure you get one of these one-of-a-kind, limited edition t-shirts.
It's an amazing t-shirt. It's amazing.
Yeah, I love it. It's definitely one of a kind. I think you'll all like it too.
And another thing is quite interesting is we got some new. We got a new sponsor through Seat Giant, which is www.seatgiant.com, and they actually from listening to our podcast, and even if you want to share this discount code with people, which is LL Podcast, you can buy all your tickets, whether they're whether state fair tickets, concerts, theaters, special events. You can get tickets in there, and they're very reasonably priced. And that's through SeatGiant.com. And said before, use our discount code for LL Podcast because that really helps us out. It helps us pay our bills as well. But you also get tickets at a different price. We're pleading with you. Pleading.
Please, use it. And you get a discount. I mean, come on. Who doesn't love a discount? Seriously.
Especially with concert tickets because they're expensive.
Oh, yeah.
And I need to feed my baby. Feed my baby.
He's got 6 children.
I got 6 children
by different mothers.
They're all figurines behind him, and he needs his tiki doll.
I just found his tiki doll. It's
$300.
Go fund Keith for his tiki doll.
We have a Patreon site. Come and get my tiki doll.
They're more expensive too. I don't know how you could find that. But once they're expensive, that's why you could find them.
My, what a year this has been. In case you think you have missed out on any of our season 1 episodes, you're in luck. Head on over to our website at llpodcast.com to find all of our past episodes. Check out our social and podcast platforms, as well as become a patron and read our reviews of books to screens and everything in between. Next month, we kick off season 2 with Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. There's so much more to come next season, and we look forward to sharing it all with you. Thank you for downloading, sharing, and liking the Literary License Podcast. Season 1, it's a wrap. Bye, folks.
Bye everybody.
Got a genius in my phone, Macaulay Culkin, Home Alone, Mike Jones, Mike who? Mike and Mike's got me like happy Hanukkah. Oopsie doopsie daisy, my family's a little crazy nowadays. Nothing's fazing me, I think I have ADD. Knock knock, who's there? No one's there, the world is ending. knock, knock, who's there? No one's there, the world is ending. Knock, knock, who's there? No one's there, the world is ending. Knock, knock, who's there? Smell my blood. Get about it, flowers flickering, superpower. Should've saved the world right now, I should've saved it in an hour. Sha-la-la-la, like every day's my birthday. Sha-la-la-la, like every day's my birthday. Aquarius apocalyptic. Ron Paul, Ron Jeremy, Ron and McDonald. He had a farm, E-I-E-I-O, E-I-E-I-O. Back them up like parasites and stuff them in the stove. Watch them grow, feeding back kids whose moms will never know. A rolling rock that cannot be stopped is a rock called rock and roll. This is the Aquarius apocalyptic. We are slow, welcome to the show. But before we go, we really wanna know, how do you feel?
Pretty damn good, my number one motherfucker.
Sha-la-la-la, like every day's my birthday. Sha-la-la-la, like every day's my birthday. Aquarius apocalyptic. What goes up must come down. What goes around comes around. Don't be afraid, nothing's changed. We're safe and sound. What